So ID Cooling has done what no one else has been brave enough to do. The paste is scented. That's right, they've done it. They've innovated scented thermal paste. We've been waiting for it, and it's here. In other news, though, there's a lot of coolers here today. So this is an updated A720. ID Cooling's basically targeting sort of that, it's kind of like a higher end, but still affordable price class, where it's supposed to be around $70. They've done a serious overhaul from the A720 that we tested previously. So the A720 original, in our previous testing and benchmarks, was one of the top performers for the price, was very competitive with Noctua, a little bit cheaper, or actually these days a lot cheaper given the changes from Noctua with pricing. But some of the key changes are, first of all, you can see in there some pogo pins, so they're doing a pin to pad to deliver power to the fan, so the fan does not have a cable. Now, downsides of this obviously are it does not have a cable, and so if you wanted to use it for something else, it basically has no other use. The upsides are it is cableless, obviously, and so that connects to here to just make things a little bit cleaner for setup. They've also, on the sort of performance side, other than changing the fans, they've soldered the fin stack to the heat pipes, and so this is something that a couple companies are doing now. Some of them claim basically no performance improvement, some claim a performance improvement. ID Cooling says like for like A720 versus the new A720 AD, they're seeing about a 2-degree delta improvement at 280 watts. So we'll go over that. They also have some cheaper coolers we'll talk about today, and then they have a ton of liquid coolers. And right now, from my perspective, it seems like ID Cooling is kind of targeting that. It's almost like the Arctic air cooler lineup, where they're not as cheap as Thermalright, and they're not as expensive as some of the other companies. So they're socketing kind of in the middle, but keeping the quality levels in focus for some of their design. So we'll talk about all that. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Thermaltake TR100 Portable Mini ITX case. The TR100 case has a mesh ventilated front panel, heavily perforated side and top panels, and claims to support up to 280mm liquid coolers and large GPUs up to 360mm long and 70mm thick. It even has an optional suitcase with cutouts for the system, a mouse, keyboard, and monitor for transport. The Thermaltake TR100 Mini ITX case targets portable, smaller form factor PC building while maintaining compatibility for relatively large components. Learn more at the link in the description below. All right, so for the fans are all PPT on these. Typically for fans, the highest end ones, the most expensive ones, they use an LCP, which is a liquid crystal material in the middle for the blades, and then sometimes they'll do LCP for the inner and the outer part of the fan, like Noctua is doing, and that's for the super expensive fans where they're basically trying to get the tip-to-frame clearance as small as possible. So you might hear like a 0.6, 0.8 millimeter, something like that. That requires LCP, or now some are doing metal. ID Cooling's using PPT, which helps with price control, as long as they can still hit performance targets. And it's supposed to be, I think, 30% fiberglass reinforced. That helps maintain the rigidity as the blade stretches out towards the inner walls of the frame. So that's what the fiberglass reinforcement is for. This is the 620 AD. It does not come with the scented thermal paste. You pay extra for that. We tested the 620 in the past as well. Competed pretty closely with the old ID Cooling 620 class cooler, AK620 I think they called it, or AK600. This was pretty similar to that in our testing previously, but this is a newer AD model. Same thing as the 720, they are soldering the fin stack to the heat pipes, so there's some improvement from that. And then the fan change, where it's just going to a newer fan design. So I asked ID Cooling, what is the biggest thing you're trying to change from the 720 previously and the 620 to this one, and the answer was acoustics. So apparently the number one complaint from people was noise, and it was, I think they were trying to describe basically a rattle. And so what they've done is reshape the blades, so they've gone for a more gradual swoop or curve to the blade, and changed the blade angle at the hub. I don't have the specific numbers for the blade angle, but that was the key change that ID Cooling focused on. So we'll test all this. I mean, we just restarted our cooler benchmark with the AM5, so we have a 150 watt 9800 X3D heat load, and then a 200 or 200 watt 9950 X3D heat load, and this will be going through as soon as it's available. They haven't given me a date yet. It's probably going to be end of year, like Q4 or something. And then, so that's $70. The 620 AD is $55. And the last metric I have, actually two, there's 3 different levels for the ram clearance on the front fans that can be adjusted and clipped in. And then the fan thickness, so outside, I think, as I understand it, is 28 millimeters, and then inside is a 30 millimeter fan, which allows them to maintain a higher static pressure through the fin stack, especially with the dual tower fin stacks. So other coolers, just quickly, would be over here. So this is going to be the 410 series. ID Cooling already has a 410 series. Now they're doing a 410 TD. So AD stands for, I have no idea. TD stands for temperature display. That one's easy. And they're slapping a temperature display on the top of some of the coolers. We've got some footage of it, and that changes the price, obviously, go a little bit higher. So the 410 TD is supposed to be a $35 cooler. It has a temperature digital display, shows CPU temperature, and then the fin stack thickness has changed as well from the previous 410, so I think that's 50 millimeters from what I've heard. And then otherwise, the heat pipes are all using a composite powder and groove style. And we'll maybe cut them open to see. Normally you just see a sintered powder, so ID Cooling says they're going for a composite solution. And then for the actual changes on the cold plate, so they are trying to push the heat pipes as close together as possible. Not as impressive as what we saw with Scythe on their prototype, where Scythe actually, they basically conjoined them all into one direct touch pad, but they're getting closer. So anyway, for the rest of this, it is just a 4 heat pipe solution. That's what the 4 is for. And we'll move over to some of the liquid coolers now. Although on the way, I'll just point out these 2 downdraft coolers. But we're not currently doing a lot of testing for downdrafts, so we'll move on. All right, so next, ID Cooling has a ton of liquid coolers. Not as many as we were overwhelmed with at Thermalright's booth, but still a lot. So we'll start at the higher end, work down. This one, the only reason this immediately jumped out at me was because the fans are actually different width than the radiator. So that is abnormal. You can see the radiator extends all the way out to these spacers at the end. So this is a 140 mil wide. And the reason for that is the LEDs on the side of it. So this is kind of like what we saw Thermal Take playing around with at their booth, but they're using screens, basically just strapping more lighting to the sides of the radiators, in this case the side of the fans. So it's 140 wide for the rad, 120 for the fans, and then to try and compensate for some of the potential performance loss from making that decision of going for smaller fans, ID Cooling has added 2 water channels. So we were told that the difference in a purely like-for-like scenario isn't huge. So water channels are like down the, actually you can look at the back of this one. So those, we'll call it vertical channels, that's what the water flows through, the fins are between them, and they've added 2. So the SL360 V2 Plus, as it's called, which is a hell of a name to remember, is 14, the typical is 12. The cooler is supposed to be $190 when it comes out. And the other thing they've done to try and compensate is add liquid. So between the tank and the extra channels, they end up with 36 grams more liquid. The propylene glycol percentage, and yes, this is the information we try to get at the booths. Propylene glycol percentage is like 15%. So the reason that's important is the more distilled water you have in these loops, the better the cooling performance. So propylene glycol helps with things like cold storage, transit, freight, and cold temperatures, but going too high for that compromises the performance. So 15% is a little on the lower end, which is a good thing for performance, especially if they're not targeting any enterprise uses. The fans are AP120s. They're 28 millimeters thick, so a lot of the performance change is going to come from that. They're FDBs, 3-phase, 6-pole, and the cooler will have a 6-year warranty, we're told. And then the surface area has been increased from what would be a traditional radiator with a 360 setup by about 15%, they're telling us, which is because of that size change. So that'll cover the SL360 V2 Plus. There's no offset bracket. I have made a request. I basically said, hey, if you can push the cooler so that the micro fins are centered on the chiplets instead on AMD, it should help out. So we'll see if they do that. And then we also, I was having a hell of a time trying to translate my question about the inner dimensions of the micro fins versus the bottom of the cold plate. It's not my vocabulary. So we drew it, and we came out to a 0.5 millimeter gap between the bottom of the micro fins and basically the bottom of the cold plate. So that was 0.5. Lee, as an example, is experimenting with 0.3. The downside with 0.3 or something smaller is there could be more flex, some more weakness. The upside is the performance will be better because you're getting the water and the microfins closer to the heat source, which is the CPU IHS. So anyway, that was the kind of stuff we were talking about. Over here, so the FX360s are the cheaper ones. We'll kind of skip the rest for now and just leave those for later coverage. But the FX360, I think it's called TD Black, that cooler is the cheapest one they have. That's $80. It's a 360 mil, and with an LCD, it's $90. So this is the LCD here. And the LCD for what we're told is 240 by 240, and that's a 27 millimeter thick radiator, which is the standard. And actually, this one is much thicker. I need to check my notes. That's the DX360, and that has a 38 millimeter thick radiator. It's supposed to be a $120 device with the LCD. Launch is TBD, and it's 2.8 inch screen, but really the main thing I was focusing on was just that radiator thickness, where it is much fatter than the 27 mil standard. All right, so the last one is the DX360 GDL, and this, they're kind of this is a prototype. So the key things are the tubes up here, those you can see are coming straight out of the block and right into the radiator. This is something we've seen at least 2 other companies experimenting this specific show. This seems to be what everyone's doing now, but just to get the tubing run shorter, there's downsides to that. The key one is that's where your radiator goes. It does not go anywhere else, and if you've got a super tall case, it's going to be a problem, but it does shorten the run, and it cleans it up. So this seems to be a trend for this year's Computex. Other information on this, they've added 82 grams of additional water or liquid by changing the radiator size. This one is 130 wide. It's got a 120 fan, and then the fans are 27 millimeters thick, and the tubing is 100 millimeters long. So, and then the cap is just magnetic and pops off like that. So that exposes the top of the tubes and the rest of the block. So I think that covers it for ID Cooling's booth. There's a lot here. We did most of it, and we'll have more testing in our CPU cooler reviews soon, so check back for all that. We've just overhauled all the testing, have a lot to do to get some new charts out and numbers. Otherwise, subscribe for more as always. Check the links below for other coverage, and we'll see you all next time.